Chapter 6. First thing the next morning, it was not just the 6 children. Evelyn's family and the princess's retinues were also gathered into the great hall. "Follow me, please," she requested as she turned and walked through the empty kitchens and out to the back courtyard, the private area of her manor. So far in all the exploring done of the manor and its surrounding lands, no one had made it to the back courtyard and its gardens. Here it seemed that the seasons of the outside world did not come to fruit. Large trees and bushes that were manicured to perfection. The 2 dozen people crowded close to each other as Nalina led them down the steps into the garden. Small temples dedicated to each of the gods and goddesses rested amongst the foliage. There was the harvest goddess with her long shafts of wheat. The god of death's temple had several rows of benches and a large counter to put his sacrifices. But the most ornate and oldest of the temples was that of the cunning one. Nalina led them to this temple. Triumphant, he sat on the throne of his temple. A crow sat on top of his throne. The legs had 2 foxes carved in gold, and the arms were topped with chess pieces. A kneeling pad sat at the feet of the god, carved in gold. Incense hung heavy in the air, and this temple was very clearly cared for and well loved. Nalina knelt for a minute, and he bowed her head to touch her forehead to his knee for a quick moment before she stood again. When she turned to face them all, it was not Nalina, though that they had all known all this time. This one had hair of honey blonde that fell to her hips in wavy locks. Her eyes were a sharp blue, but her look was softer. She was also taller and more muscular. She had a warrior's body along with scars from a hard-lived life. That smile, though, was the same. "Thank you for all your patience over the weeks. It is time for me to explain why I have gathered the 6 of you here." She indicated that the adults should seat themselves on the benches around the court, while the children settled on the ground in front of her. "As you know, there are common magic wielders in our world. However, you 6 are not that." Nalina settled herself on a stool at the foot of the throne. "Many millennia ago, the father and mother had 12 divine children. They got along as well as siblings did. However, a little over 500 years ago, they did have a sibling rivalry that didn't stay in the divine realms. The youngest god set off to become different from the others. He wanted all the power and all the worship for himself. He gave himself a new name, not the one the mother and father gave him. He named himself the One God. Over the next 200 years, he started to bring followers to his religion, and his religion was not like the many others that graced our plane. He is not one that teaches tolerance and understanding of others. He restricts women's abilities to do what they want, and his followers slowly begin to push this practice on others, restricting others' religions, and the zealots of his religion began to fight those who didn't agree with them, began to even execute them." She stopped for a moment and then continued. "The gods and goddesses had become very complacent in their time as divines. No one had ever challenged them before, and the one god did not instantly change his name or show his power. In fact, the only reason he was caught at all was that he made a god's blessed. Now, gods blessed are typically chosen as children. To make one of a grown adult can be very hard on the god and the person, but the one god chose an adult man, a soldier from the southern part of the southern continent. His name was David, and I knew him well. This soldier was turned from his simple life with his wife and children, and he turned to the darkness. When the one God did this, it was a declaration of war on his family. It became clear to the other divine that they were centuries late to the war. Mad chaos broke out across Aetrila. Kingdoms crumbled, families were torn apart, until the cunning God," she motioned toward the temple, "created me in the image of the cunning. While there were other gods blessed in the world, the cunning God had never made a human in his powers, and I became the turning point in the war, using the gifts given to me by my god, as well as managing to get the other gods blessed involved in the war. I was able to find a weapon to banish a god." Raw pain flashed in her eyes, and she swallowed hard. "I was in great pain by the war. To become a god's blessed, I had to leave behind my family and never see them again." The one god was furious when his demons began to lose battles. In desperation, he gave his blessed a weapon to defeat the armies of the other gods, and I went in search for an old goddess, forgotten in her exile amongst the mortals. She had a power, she gave it to me. The power to banish a god. And in the final battle, in this very spot here, myself and the other blessed managed to banish him to the furthest reaches of our universe. In the aftermath of that war, the old ways never returned. Although the one god's followers were quiet and worshipped in private, the worship of the old gods and goddesses were tainted. Besides the heartlands, women never ruled again without a man. Female warriors became a thing of the past for almost all the kingdoms. The gods and goddesses were silent, and no more blessed were chosen. Here I set up my temple in my house, facing to his banishment, so I could watch for his return. Then, 20 years ago, I woke from a prophecy sent to me from the god of prophecy. He showed me the return of the one God, and the burning of our world, great battles. But he also showed me you. Gods blessed are hard to create, immortal unless killed by another blessed. Gods and goddesses will not disavow their chosen ones, as that can nearly kill them. They are careful of who they choose. And they have chosen each of you. She finished her history lesson acknowledging the 6 children who sat in front of her. Some of you have been claimed, others have not. Adeline, you were claimed at birth by the prophet and healer, which is why you were able to heal your mother at your birth. Adeline smiled. Mathilde, the animal gods have never before claimed a human, but here you are. Mathilde smiled, quite proud of herself as her cats rubbed against her. Celine, Evelyn, Aubrey, and Niall, you have yet to be claimed, but it has been foreshadowed that the birth of more gods blessed will foretell the return of the one God. Each of them nodded in understanding. I believe that the one God is going to return, and that it is your destinies to save Etrila. If you permit it, I will teach you how to use your powers. I will support you while they grow, and I will help you balance the battle inside between your divinity and your mortality. The world you know will revere you once it is known that you are the new God's blessed. Being a blessed is hard. You see me here in my natural form I was born with. Throughout my years I have become a harder form of myself for survival. The same will happen to you. My hope is, through the friendship you all will share, will help you remember your human side, and will save you from the brutality of divinity. You have been sent to me to learn to control your powers, and I will do that, but fighting in this war will not be easy. You will not age, though your loved ones will. You will not die, and people will not understand you. Unfortunately, you cannot stop being a blessed. You can, however, choose to walk the path alone or together. But this is a path you will have to walk, Nalina warned them. The adults were silent, each looking at the children with a sense of awe. But one was already standing. She may have been the smallest and daintiest of the group, but her smile was a wide and caring one. I, for one, would rather walk this path with you leading me, Lady Nalina. My decision has not changed. I will stay with you and train with you, Adeline proclaimed. I don't see how I have anything better to do. I'm in, Celine stated simply. One by one, they agreed, without hesitation. And so they began to learn about their past. Nalina had set these young pupils of hers to a tremendous task. She knew that the leaders of Etrila had long forgotten the past. It would be hard to remind them of the horrors of the gods' war. Even harder to make them look upon these young people, no more than children, and respect that they knew what they were talking about. The blank age had numbed everyone to the true nature of the gods and the goddesses, how the divine used to walk amongst mortals like normal folk. But they were coming back. She could feel it. She set the 6 young children to learning the history of the world. They learnt all of the religions, including the one gods. They were taught the languages of Etrila, math, writing, and reading. Some of them already knew these tasks, others did not, and to their excitement she began to help them explore their magical abilities. They all learned how to make the most basic of potions, from a drink to cure acne to help the common cold. Potions were an easy start, although Aubrey and Adeline had already been making potions. Nalina had seen over the many years of her existence how important it was to know how to make potions, whether for the need of extra coin or to help the common folk. It was slow going at first, but Nalina had learned nothing but patience over her many years alone. Adeline and Aubrey were working together at their cauldrons, as they learned how to make an anti-pregnancy drink. Niall and Evelyn were making a potion to help with belly aches. Mathilde had insisted on making poultices, not potions. Her poultices she was making up were for both animals and people with arthritic joints. Celine was still on the first potion, to help with headaches. "You're doing well, Celine," Nalina soothed the girl, seeing her frustration. "How will knowing how to make a potion for headaches help me on the battlefield?" Nalina nodded patiently at her frustrated words. "Headache potions can also help with an aching head from being struck with a lance, and you will need to be able to help keep your soldiers healthy." "I suppose, but won't Adeline be there to make the potions we need?" Celine asked. Nalina drifted by Mathilde's potion and took a spoonful out to spread on top of her hand to see if it was overly hot to the touch, as this was a concoction of Mathilde's invention. "Unfortunately, you will not always be together, no matter how much we will wish it. One army might be on one side, but another enemy on the other side. And after a battle, every helping hand counts," Nalina cautioned them. As the months flew by, potions class would turn from a structured lesson to a do-it-yourself, and when she could trust them to make the basic potions, she then changed it to spells. This was harder as she needed volunteers to help the younger blessed. "Our spells are not like that of a normal magic wielder. We do not need to chant rhymes or use herbs. Their magic comes from those rhymes. Our magic comes from the god or goddess that has chosen you. As they do not need chants, we are the same. Using our will and strength from within, we can do our magic. Using the force of my mind, I can cast a spell on myself, so that way Fidelius cannot see me." She demonstrated this by snapping her fingers, and Fidelius did look around trying to find her. Even the others could not find her until she lifted her spell. They set about learning how to turn invisible, how to move things with their minds. In these tasks, some of them struggled, but none more than Celine. Her powers seemed to be strictly in the sense of fire and combat. She never could make herself fully invisible. All she was able to do was make herself harder to see. She could move things with her mind easily. Nalina finally had to accept that Celine would not improve even with continually heckling, and they moved on. Now, we are enormously powerful individuals. However, even the least magical human can cast off spells put on them. That is the greatness of the human mind. So to keep a human under an enchantment takes a great deal of skill and concentration. For this, you will each be working on the people closest to you. Celine frowned at Fidelius across the table from her. "You got the short end of the stick," she said sulkily. "Patience, my lady. You've had good luck in your weapons lessons. You just need patience here," he told her. It was true. Over the months while they had been working in the workroom, they had also been working in the training ring. In that, Celine had thrived, and Adeline was faltering. Celine was eager to learn how to use every weapon available to her. At that moment, though, Celine had to focus on trying to keep Fidelius under an enchantment that would make him believe the water in his mug was ale. She was failing miserably. Nalina patted her hand encouragingly as she walked by. Adeline already had not only her lady's maid under an enchantment, but also Owen. They were both sowing the air. She seemed unfazed by having two people under her control, and Nalina stopped to watch her for a moment. Different illusions for the both of them, Adeline, she instructed her, curious to see if she could. Adeline did not even struggle, but with a blink she had her maid stay in sewing and Owen began to brush at fake hair around his face. "All right, and that is enough," Adeline stopped them. The days turned into weeks, which quickly turned into months. For the children, sometimes the days seemed to move so slowly as they struggled with classes. Letters were delivered from home and letters were sent off, but it was not unusual for royal children to be separated from their families for years at a time, and so well they missed their families. They grew used to it very quickly. For the adults seemed to pass so quickly, this was the truest for Nalina. Centuries alone did nothing to prepare her for the pre-pubescent emotions of young preteens and teenagers. It was exhausting. The young blessed developed at different rates, and in different strengths. The only one who had real control issues was Celine. If it did not involve animals, Mathilde could not do a single thing with it. Adeline tended to invade the minds of others when she was concentrating on her spell casting. Even though it was by accident, it always had her blushing and saying, "Sorry, sorry," as she recast shields. However slowly they began to build close relationships to each other, in the way that children would do when they were together so often, they all noticed things about each other. For example, Adeline tended to be clingy from missing her family. Celine tended to fight because she was so terrified of showing her real self. She came off aggressive. Evelyn shied away with her family because she was inherently shy and felt unworthy. Niall would rather be on the roof staring up at the stars or sleep in a bed where he did not have to be worried of not waking up the next morning than in a classroom. Aubrey simply stayed out of everyone's way and read everything she could. Mathilde would not eat meat, and it was something they had to ask why. "I can't eat animals anymore. I've found it too odd being in their minds, knowing them and then eating them," Mathilde explained one day at brunch while she piled her plate high with fruits, vegetables, and nuts. "But other animals eat animals," commented Celine. Mathilde nodded. I know, but they aren't connected to each other as I am. I'll eat eggs because the hens and I have talked about it, and the heifers have told me it's okay to have their milk, cream, and butter. But other than that, I've decided to not eat meat other than a piece of the pig at the harvest festival, out of respect of the harvest goddess." "Well, that makes sense, but does it matter to you that we eat meat?" Adeline asked hesitantly as she looked down at the ham on her plate. "Nay, I've kept my mind away from the slaughter animals. Your choices are yours to make. I just won't eat it," Mathilde reassured her as she popped a walnut in her mouth. "Are other Heartlanders vegetarian?" Aubrey asked, always eager to learn other cultures. "Hmm, not all of us, no. It depends on the individual. Some of us have chosen such a path, and in the Heartlands everyone is free to do what they choose as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else." The conversation changed to a discussion about the different cultures of each kingdom. Over time they learnt of each culture until they knew it as well as those they came from. They learnt of the vengeful Northlanders, the shy but deadly Icelanders, the Westholtians, who considered themselves the very center of grace in the northern continent. Then there were the peaceful Heartlanders, and the withdrawn and elusive northern desert folk. They each learned of themselves within these kingdoms. However, that still didn't tell them where Aubrey had come from. Her accent was one they had not heard before, and even Nelina could not place it. As Nelina dismissed her students at the end of one of their training sessions, she watched them with a frown as Mathilde instantly took off for her room, alone. This would not do. She pondered as she walked to the temple and knelt in front of the altar of the Cunning One. She glanced up to where the cruel, firm face looked down on her. "This was your idea. How about a little guiding light?" she asked aloud, though she knew better than to expect an answer. She sighed with annoyance at his silence, then stood and began to pace back and forth, her gown swirling about her legs. While Nelina was pondering, Matilda heard a knock on her door. She looked up, impatient for even her nursemaid knew better than to disturb her, but before she could even get a word to enter or nay, the door was opened, and her least favorite person in this place peeked her head around the corner. "Hey, we are sneaking down to the beach for a swim. Do you want to come?" Celine asked, without even a trace of interest in her voice. In fact, she looked like she'd rather hope Mathilde would not want to come. Mathilde nearly wanted to oblige. Why would I want to come? She was bemused when Adeline peeked her head around the Celine's with a decidedly more cheerful look upon her face. "Well, there's animals down there, and of course we would be breaking the rules, which is what Celine really wants. And besides, it's hard being cooped up in here for the others. I'm an innocent being dragged along against my will," Adeline proclaimed cheerfully. Mathilde perked up at the thought of the marine animals. The Heartlands were on the Salt River, so she'd seen some animals, but not the ones that stayed out to sea. When she was slow to move, Adeline came into the room and removed the book from her hands and set it down with a bright smile before she tugged Mathilde out the door. So she tagged along with as many giggles. Niall snuck them around the back of the kitchens and away from the front gates. "Where are we going?" Evelyn whispered with a giggle as the children scampered along. "Out the back gates, of course. It's close to the water and less guards at this time of day," Niall said over his shoulder. Once they had snuck out the walls, they ran joyously, like the young children they were, with much laughter. They scampered through the woods without a care to the sound of the rushing water. Adeline was soon panting, unable to keep up, though she laughed as she stopped and leaned against a tree. The forest was dense and dark, even in the daylight, but it scared the children not as they scattered amongst the trees. Even the animals of the forest continued to go about their day-to-day lives. Soon, Njal first, for he had often snuck this way, broke through the trees to the open ocean. To the other side was the great salt river that divided North and South Etrila. You could not see the southern continent, for this was its widest part. Soon the girls joined him on the sandy beach, and they stood briefly marveling at the ocean. With the exchanging of glances and a laugh, they yanked off their shoes and heavier clothes, leaving just small gowns or shirts and pants, and dove into the water with shouts of happiness. Though Adeline merely sat in the sand, disinclined to go in the water. She watched her friends as they frolicked, feeling quite at peace and marveling in their joy. She cried out sharply when she felt a presence behind her, alerting the other children. They stopped their play, the ocean's waves still pushing them back and forth while they stared at the figures breaking from the trees as Adeline scrambled to her feet. It was not humans, but large beasts of predatory leanings. Large bears of brown and black ambled towards the terrified princess. Mountain cats hugged the trees. Wolves in large packs prowled the sand dunes. Adeline nearly fainted with fright. Then she heard a joyous shout behind her. Mathilde came abreast with a shaking Adeline and clasped her arm. "Don't worry, Adeline, they are merely curious." She continued walking to the jaws of a large panting bear, her movements slowing, becoming nearly hypnotic. Cautiously the other children exited the ocean and came beside Adeline. Evelyn reached out to grab Adeline's hand, and she could feel a fog cast up around them to hide them. Evelyn had always been crafty at hiding herself. It was something that came naturally to her. They watched as the bear licked Mathilde's hand, and she began to move amongst the predators, completely at ease. She paid them no mind as she knelt to rub faces with the massive cats. Adeline felt hot panting on the side of her neck, and she spun around, then sat down in fright. The large bear had moved on from Mathilde and was now panting and staring at Adeline, who was slack-jawed, staring up at him. Mathilde?" she whimpered, and the Heartlands princess turned from petting the cats. "Oh, that's Sweet Tooth, Adeline. I think he likes your scent. Now, usually with a bear you do not look them in the eye, but I already asked him not to harm you. I think he likes you. Offer your hand palm down to sniff. If he licks it and lowers his head, then that's an invitation to touch him." Mathilde's usually bored voice was rather enthralled. Adeline hesitated, still staring into the small black eyes. Then she tentatively offered her hand. He huffed, making her tremble, then promptly plopped down fully beside her. She giggled as his tongue lolled out of his mouth, and he batted at her hand. Softly, slowly, she petted his nose covered with its short hairs. Meanwhile, Njal and Aubrey were being regarded quite seriously by the pack of wolves, and the foxes were cheerfully yipping at Evelyn, who was giggling and guiltily feeding them scraps from her pockets. Celine was stretched out on the sand with a mountain cat, and that was how Lady Nelina and a dozen soldiers found the children. Lady Nelina and the Heartland soldiers were not surprised. However, the other men were taken aback, especially Adeline's men, who nearly had heart attacks when they saw the princess sitting quite prim and proper on the beach with a large bear's head in her lap. What? How? Princess Adeline? Owen started with true fear in his heart, his fingers clenched tightly on his sword. Nelina's hand rested on his sword arm. "Princess Mathilde, I assume these friends of yours are friendly?" Lady Nelina asked, with a wary glance around the Heartlands men, merely shrugged as if to say they were sorry, but they had small smiles on their faces. The animals reacted to the adults' presence, in truth, were in a bit of an uproar. The wolves were snarling, hackles up, and the foxes had long melted away, leaving Evelyn oddly alone as she stared in fright at the others. Only Sweet Tooth appeared to care less that fighting humans were nearby. Adeline was focused on her task of cleaning his fur and the nits from his hair, and he was nearly asleep on top of her. "I am a lady. If everyone would withdraw back to the trees, I'm sure they would calm down enough that no one will get harmed," Mathilde said, soothing the cats she had been sitting with, a soft purr leaving their lips as she turned away from the men-at-arms. One of the soldiers stepped forward and the cats hissed. The wolves growled, and Sweet Tooth opened a lazy eye as if to appraise the situation and decide if he really had to get up. Fidelius knocked the man back with a snarl. "Don't be a fool! Do as the little princess says!" He pushed his men back as the rest joined them, leaving Nelina standing patiently. Although her magic was not wild magic of the land like Mathilde, animals tended to relax and pay her no heed, and that was true now. Come, children, you're missing supper. Say goodbye to your friends, and perhaps another day you can spend some time together again. The children disentangled themselves. Mathilde gave a traditional head rub to the cats before she stood up and joined the others, the wolves already fading into the woods. Sweet Tooth took some convincing. Adeline giggled and gave him a hug, but he groaned as if to say it pained him to move. She looked at Mathilde, who stood in front of him, her brow furrowed as she had a mental argument with the large bear. Perhaps Sweet Tooth needs a little coaxing, suggested Nelina, who, with a smile she produced, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief, a piece of honeycomb. The bear sat up and panted at her, making her laugh as she fed him the sticky treat, patting him fondly on the nose. How do you know Sweet Tooth? Mathilde asked, awed and her eyes wide. Who do you think gave him his nickname, my dear? I caught Sweet Tooth as a cub breaking into a few beehives and had to persuade him and his sow to not eat the terrified farmer. He's been on my land since his birth, and has since he is friendly won't attack humans. This is his home as well, Nelina said, as she helped Adeline to her feet. A fond pat on the nose for Sweet Tooth and a promise to return, then the children walked home. Lady Nelina watched the 6 children as they walked together, talking and laughing, and she blessed the god, who apparently still listened to her. Perhaps having these 6 children together wasn't a cause to order more wine from the southern vineyards.